It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
1 minute. Someone's keying their microphone. Okay, stand by for systems. Okay, Steve.
Okay, you got it out. Someone is keying their mic. Let's get off the test frequency. Let's put in another 30 seconds, nice and one.
Roger. And 008, hold us heading.
P-52 cameras are on.
The winds are okay, Steve. Westerly at about 10 knots.
Coming on. I'm indicating 004. How does that look?
Looks good, Steve, and all systems are okay here. The winds are westerly at 10 knots.
Okay.
This is NASA 1 calling 10 seconds now.
10 seconds, roger. 0, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Greetings, Planeteers, and welcome back to Sci-Fi and More. I'm your host, Mike Cosmos, and I would like to start by thanking everyone that has watched and liked our videos. And a big thanks to those that have subscribed to the channel. And please continue to let us know in the comments below if there is anything particular you would like to see. In this episode, we are going to honor a request from one of our Planeteer subscribers and cover one of the most iconic characters from the 1970s, the $6 Million Man, which follows the adventures of NASA test pilot Colonel Steve Austin. The $6 Million Man is an American television series about a cyborg recruited to work for the Office of Scientific Intelligence, starring Lee Majors as Colonel Steve Austin. The show was based on the novel called Cyborg, which was written by Martin Caidin and first published in April of 1972. It was initially aired on the ABC network for 5 seasons between 1974 and 1978, following 3 television pilot movies in 1973. The series also spawned a spin-off called The Bionic Woman in 1976, and was the subject of 3 made-for-television reunion films for both The $6 Million Man and The Bionic Woman in the 1980s and 90s. The show draws heavily from the book Cyborg and tells the story of the crash of U.S. Air Force test pilot Steve Austin and his subsequent implantation with bionics, who was then recruited into a secret government organization called the Office of Strategic Operations, or the OSO, along with Dr. Rudy Wells, who developed the bionic technology. They're both recruited by OSO director Oscar Goldman. The book sees Steve pressed into service as an international spy for the OSO because of his new bionic abilities, and to be used as a weapon if necessary. The show, on the other hand, had 2 different origins for Steve Austin. The first was in the original 3 made-for-TV movies, where Steve Austin was a civilian test pilot and had the distinction of being the only civilian to ever walk on the moon. That storyline was adjusted for the series, where the character of Colonel Steve Austin was pressed back into military service as a test pilot. Not only was The $6 Million Man inspired by the book, but so was its spin-off show, The Bionic Woman. And the success of the book and the shows together led to a series of novels by Caidin featuring the character, which generally followed a separate continuity from the TV series. But aside from the character of Steve Austin being heavily influenced and adapted for a TV series, so too was one of the most memorable opening titles in the history of television. The opening sees Steve Austin in the cockpit of an M2F2 lifting body carried under the wing of a B-52 bomber, as both he and the experimental aircraft are dropped and launched for a test flight that ends in near tragedy for Steve Austin. That footage showed at the beginning of every episode. It's actually NASA and Air Force footage of the 16th experimental flight of the M2F2 lifting body. This aircraft was developed by Northrop Corporation and was one of 5 lifting body designs flown by NASA to study and validate the concept of safely maneuvering and landing a low-lift, overdrag vehicle upon re-entry from space. That actually led to many of the landing flight paths of a vast majority of the shuttle missions. However, on May 10, 1967, the pilot that was actually at the controls of that M2F2 on its 16th and final glide flight was test pilot Bruce Peterson, who has earned the nickname the real-life $6 Million Man. Due to the unstable aircraft design, the M2F2 suffered a pilot-induced oscillation as the dry lake bed was rapidly approaching. The lateral control problems were evident, even though it had a stability augmentation control system. The short blended wings of the M2F2 produced considerably less roll authority than most aircraft. During the last moments of the lifting body test flight, the vehicle rolled from one side to the other side as Peterson tried to bring it under control. Peterson recovered, but then was distracted by a rescue helicopter, and he drifted in a crosswind to an unmarked area of the lake bed beyond the markers provided on the lake bed runway, allowing the pilot to judge altitude over the featureless surface. Peterson fired the M2F2 landing rockets for immediate lift, but hit the lake bed at over 250 miles an hour before his gear was fully down and locked. At impact, the M2F2 twisted and rolled over 6 times, coming to rest upside down. Miraculously, Peterson survived the crash and was pulled from the wreck and was rushed to March Air Force Base Hospital and then later to UCLA Hospital, where he recovered, but unfortunately lost vision in his right eye. On the show, when NASA astronaut, United States Air Force Colonel Steve Austin is severely injured in the crash of the experimental lifting body aircraft, he is essentially rebuilt in an operation conducted by Dr. Rudy Wells. That costs $6 million in 1973. So to put that into context, as of this video, the cost today would be estimated between $40 and $50 million, give or take. His right arm, both legs, and left eye are replaced with bionic implants that enhanced his strength, speed, and vision far above human norms. He can run at speeds over 60 miles an hour, and his eye has 20-to-1 zoom lens and infrared capabilities, while his bionic limbs all have the equivalent power of a bulldozer. He uses his enhanced abilities to work as a secret agent for the OSI, which on the show was the Office of Scientific Intelligence, not the OSO as it was in the book. They indeed did have the technology, and they did rebuild him better, stronger, faster. In March of 1973, the book Cyborg was loosely adapted as the made-for-TV movie titled The $6 Million Man, starring Lee Majors. However, Lee Majors was not the first choice to play Steve Austin. The producer's first choice was an actor named Monty Markham, who is probably best known for his roles on the new Perry Mason show in the 70s, The Guns of the Magnificent Seven in 1969, and The Astronaut in 1972. The $6 Million Man TV movie was nominated for a Hugo Award, but modified Caden's story and notably made Steve Austin a civilian astronaut rather than a colonel in the United States Air Force. And unlike the series, there were other noticeable differences to the TV movie, such as the absence of the standard features such as the really cool electronic sound effects that Steve Austin made whenever he moved around, the slow motion running, and the character of Oscar Goldman. Instead, another character for the movie was put in, named Oliver Spencer, who was played by Darren McGavin. And he was Steve Austin's supervisor at the Office of Strategic Operations, where Steve reported to in the book. The CIA did have an Office of Scientific Intelligence in the 1970s, and that department would be the main character agency in the series. The lead scientist involved in implanting Austin's bionic hardware was Dr. Rudy Wells, who was played in the pilot by Martin Balsam, then on an occasional basis in the series by Alan Oppenheimer, and finally as the series regular by Martin E. Brooks. Austin's enhanced capabilities of his bionic eye were also never present during the TV movie. The first movie was a massive ratings blockbuster for ABC, and was soon followed by two more TV movies in October and November of 1973 as part of ABC's rotating Movie of the Week series. The second TV movie was titled $6 Million Man, Wine, Women, and War, and the third was titled The $6 Million Man, The Solid Gold Kidnapping. The second movie bore strong resemblances to Caden's second cyborg novel, Operation Nuke. The third one, however, The Solid Gold Kidnapping, was its own original story. Following the release of the made-for-TV movies, the debut of The $6 Million Man premiered as a weekly hour-long series. Now, what's interesting is that the latter two movies were produced by Glenn A. Larson, who introduced a James Bond flavor to the series and reinstated Austin's status from the novels as a U.S. Air Force colonel. Now, if you know anything about television in the 70s and 80s on ABC, NBC, and CBS, you will know that Glenn A. Larson had his name all over primetime television over those 2 decades, bringing all kinds of memorable shows from those eras, both sci-fi and non-sci-fi shows. Shows like Battlestar Galactica, Buck Rogers in the 25th Century, Knight Rider, Manimal, The Misadventures of Sheriff Lobo, Quincy, The Fall Guy, The Hardy Boys' Nancy Drew Mysteries, and BJ and the Bear, just to name a few. The list of TV credits to his name is really extensive, but I gotta say, when I was a little kid, there's just something cool about riding around in a giant big rig with a chimpanzee sitting in the passenger seat named Bear. BJ and the Bear. Loved that show. However, by the time The $6 Million Man had moved into the hour-long series, the show was being produced by Star Trek IV producer Harve Bennett, who decided to dispense with the James Bond gloss of the movies and portrayed a more down-to-earth Steve Austin. In a quote from Lee Majors, he indicated that his character, Steve Austin, hates the whole idea of spying. He finds it repugnant and degrading. The character, not the actor. If he's a James Bond, he's the most reluctant one we've ever had. So as a result, Harve Bennett decided this would not be a good fit for the character in an ongoing series. Also, Bennett dialed back the use of deadly force by Steve Austin, which is a frequent characteristic of Austin in Caden's novels and was utilized occasionally in the movies in early episodes. The show was very popular during its run and introduced several pop culture elements of the 1970s, such as the show's opening catchphrase, "We can rebuild him, we have the technology," which was voiced by Richard Anderson in his role of Oscar Goldman. The slow-motion action sequences and the accompanying electronic sound effects, which were originally referred to as kung fu slow motion in pop culture due to the techniques being used in the 1970s martial art television series Kung Fu, starring David Carradine. Additionally, according to Herbie J. Palato's book, The Bionic Book, the use of the slow motion on the series was inspired by its use of the long-running series NFL Films. In 1975, a 2-part episode titled The Bionic Woman written for television by Kenneth Johnson, introduced the lead character of Jamie Summers, played by Lindsay Wagner, a professional tennis player who rekindled an old romance with Steve Austin, only to experience a parachuting accident that resulted in her being given bionic parts similar to Steve. Ultimately, her body rejected her bionic hardware and sadly, she died. But that would not be the last we saw of Jamie Summers and the Bionic Woman, as the character was an instant hit and very popular with the viewers. As the following season of The $6 Million Man got underway, it was revealed that Jamie Summers had survived, having been saved by an experimental cryogenic procedure, and she was given her own spin-off series, The Bionic Woman. But this Jamie was different, as she had suffered amnesia as a result of the bionic hardware and could not remember her relationship with Steve. The spin-off ran until 1978, when both it and The $6 Million Man were simultaneously canceled, though these two series at the time were on different networks when their final season aired. But wait, there's still more. Just because both series were canceled doesn't mean that would be the end. Both Lee Majors and Lindsay Wagner reprised their roles of Steve Austin and Jamie Summers and returned for 3 made-for-TV movies: The Return of the $6 Million Man and the Bionic Woman in 1987, Bionic Showdown, the $6 Million Man and the Bionic Woman in 1989, which featured a young Sandra Bullock in an early role as a new Bionic Woman, and Bionic Ever After in 1994, in which Steve and Jamie finally get married. In addition to Majors and Wagner reprising their roles in all 3 productions, we also got the return of Richard Anderson as Oscar Goldman and Martin E. Brooks as Rudy Wells. The reunion films addressed the partial amnesia Summers had suffered during the original series, and all 3 films featured Lee Majors' son, Lee Majors II, as OSI agent Jim Castilian. The first 2 movies were written in anticipation of creating new bionic characters in their own series, but nothing further was ever seen of the new characters that were introduced. The 3rd movie was intended as a finale, and to this day, it still is. Now, for myself, I was less excited about the 3 TV movies from the late 80s and early 90s than I ever was about the $6 Million Man series. But, to be fair, the crossover final 3 TV movies did bring a nice conclusion to the story arc for both Steve Austin and Jamie Summers, and gave the viewers a nice final outing for both shows. But let's be honest, you can't talk about the $6 Million Man without talking about the most popular story arcs of the series. I'm talking about the battles against Bigfoot. During the 3rd, 4th, and 5th seasons of the $6 Million Man, we were all treated to 3 stories spanning 5 separate episodes in both series, with one of the greatest urban legends known to man. The story begins with the 2-part episode, Secret of Bigfoot, Part 1, which originally aired on February 1st, 1976, followed by Part 2 on February 4th. Part 1 finds Steve Austin and Oscar Goldman in a remote region of the California mountains as part of a team working with high-tech earthquake sensors, when 2 geologists, Ivan and Marlene Becky, disappear under mysterious conditions, and tracks of the legendary wild beast called Bigfoot are found nearby. When Bigfoot, played by wrestling superstar Andre the Giant, later attacks the team's base camp, Steve pursues and fights with the beast, unaware that he is being monitored by aliens who live in a nearby mountain. During the fight, one of Bigfoot's arms becomes detached, revealing that it is not an animal, but some form of a robot. Bigfoot flees with his detached arm, and Steve follows the creature into a cave which turns out to be inside the mountain occupied by the aliens, and Steve is soon rendered unconscious, captured, and analyzed by the aliens. When Steve wakes up, he learns from a female alien named Shallon, played by Stephanie Powers, that Bigfoot was built and controlled by the aliens to be their protector. The earthquake sensor team had been attacked because they had identified a volcanic vent that powered the alien colony. Meanwhile, Oscar learns that a major earthquake is predicted along the San Meridian fault line within the next few hours, which will put the California coastal cities in grave jeopardy. Only a controlled underground nuclear explosion detonated along a smaller fault line will prevent the main earthquake from happening. Oscar authorizes this, knowing that Steve and Marlene are still missing in the area and will be at serious risk from the explosion and subsequent earthquake. In Part 2, Marlene Becky is found safe before any nuclear detonation happens in the mountains, but Steve Austin remains in the custody of the aliens within their mountain colony as the countdown to the man-made earthquake continues. Steve learns that Shallon has been sent to stop the underground explosion from happening, and he escapes the colony to ensure the detonation does in fact take place. After the detonation takes place, Steve accompanies Shallon back to the colony, and with the assistance from Bigfoot, helps the aliens by restoring their power supply and freeing them from the fallen debris. After all are safe, the alien leader Shallon erases Steve's recent memory and returns him back into the forest, where he is found by Oscar Goldman and the earthquake team. Then we get to the epic crossover event of the 1970s with the Bigfoot two-parter, The Return of Bigfoot. This two-parter started on the Season 4 premiere of The $6 Million Man, airing on September 19, 1976, and finished with Part 2 on the Season 2 premiere of The Bionic Woman on September 22nd. In Part 1, a series of burglaries point to the use of bionics, and Steve falls under suspicion. Steve is approached by an alien named Jillian, whose fellow explorers were first encountered by Steve in The Secret of Bigfoot. Jillian restores Steve's memory that Shallon had erased in order to gain his assistance. The rebel splinter group of aliens, led by Nedlick, have damaged the alien power generator and have taken Bigfoot, now played by Ted Cassidy. Steve agrees to help, but suspicion from Steve's peers grows as he refuses to reveal the information that could clear him. When Steve finally tells Oscar what is happening, Oscar doesn't believe him, and Steve flees. The Season 2 premiere of The Bionic Woman just comes shooting out of the gate, as Jamie must save Steve's life, fight off the Bigfoot, and prevent a band of renegade aliens from causing a global catastrophe on their way to world domination. Part 2 begins with Steve in a coma, suffering from radiation poisoning, and Oscar disbelieving all talk of the Bigfoot aliens. Luckily, Oscar likes his bionic friends enough to loan Jamie a chopper, and she swiftly makes contact with the aliens. Jillian takes Jamie to Shallon, who, after learning about Steve, tells Jamie of the rebels and the threat they represent to Earth. Shallon and Jamie make a deal. Jamie will oppose Nedlick and his renegade aliens, while Jillian takes a dose of neotraxin to help Steve. What they don't know is that this is Shallon's last dose, that she is sacrificing for Steve at the risk of her own life. Jamie allows herself to be captured by the alien splinter group and begins to sow the seeds of doubt in Bigfoot's ear. Recovered thanks to Jillian's administration of the neotraxin, Steve and Jillian go to the renegade aliens' hideout in Mexico, where they are holding Jamie. But the aliens have damaged the Earth's crust, and a geological catastrophe is imminent. Overcoming the aliens is only the first step. Jamie, Steve, and Bigfoot must heal the volcano before calamity ensues. When the crisis is past, Shallon's sacrifice is revealed. To the great regret of her creation, Bigfoot, who bears the guilt of the tragedy, albeit as an unwitting accomplice, the story ends and the aliens and humans part as friends. And finally, we get to the conclusion of the Bigfoot arc, which came in Season 5, Episode 5 of The $6 Million Man, airing on October 9th, 1977. In Bigfoot 5, Bigfoot is discovered by a wildlife biologist sleeping in a chamber where the alien outpost used to be. He reacts violently when being awoken. Rudy Wells arrives on the scene and discovers Bigfoot is changing from being partially neosynthetic to becoming all biological. But he needs to finish this transformation before he can emotionally stabilize, which Rudy believes will take a few more years. Steve believes Bigfoot has gone back into space with the aliens who created him, but is spotted in the wilderness and goes on a rampage. When Steve learns that Bigfoot has been seen and photographed by anthropologist Hope Langston, who has plans to capture the creature and study it, Steve goes to her camp to try to persuade her not to capture the cybernetic beast. But the young woman defies him. Steve eventually catches up with his old friend Bigfoot, who inexplicably attacks him, then runs away. Meanwhile, Langston's associates, Jason O'Neill and Charlie Wynn, make plans to catch Bigfoot on their own and make a fortune by exploiting it. Now, if I'm being honest, this entry into the overall Bigfoot story is the weakest one. And in doing my research, I learned that I actually forgot about this particular episode. The first two stories, that was a solid story arc. But with this one, I almost feel like the writers and producers were just trying to recapture some of that $6 Million Man versus Bigfoot gold they had going with the previous episodes. But overall, it's a fun story. It reminds me of when my friends and I were little kids and we would act out in slow motion the fighting and the sound effects on the playground at school. Well, at least until a disagreement would happen about who would be Steve Austin and who would be Bigfoot, which would always lead to a real fight in the schoolyard. Yeah, when we were little kids, we were ridiculous. Over the years, shows I've enjoyed from the 70s have managed to be resurrected in one form or another, making it great as an adult to see a lot of updated versions of the same things I loved as a kid. They're not all great. Some are better than others. Now, if they could only finally give us an updated feature film with Steve Austin, that would be fantastic. Well, according to a February 2022 article by CinemaBlend, there have been discussions and plans in the works to adapt the $6 Million Man to the big screen, retitled for today as the $6 Billion Man. In an interview with Mark Wahlberg, who apparently really wants to be Steve Austin in a full-length feature film, the actor said he's been trying to get the $6 Billion Man made since 2014, and the movie looked to be greenlit in 2021. Wahlberg called it a great balance of all kinds of this wish fulfillment and these abilities to do amazing things, yet still being very grounded and real. Not to mention Wahlberg being able to do the movie in normal clothes, rather than wearing spandex or a cape. However, due to various director and writer changes over the years, among other obstacles, the $6 Billion Man just hasn't been able to get off the ground. Though, as Wahlberg indicated, it was ready to go in 2021, but Warner Brothers apparently pressed pause. Wahlberg isn't willing to say with 100% certainty that the $6 Billion Man will never happen, but for now, it's been put on ice. So, all this talk about bionics makes me wonder how feasible it would be today with real-world implants, expanding the technological frontier, advances in medicine, and the ongoing talks about artificial intelligence. But I think that is going to be its own video. And there you have it, Planeteers. We hope you have enjoyed the video. Go ahead and subscribe to the channel for more exciting videos, and please be sure to drop a like and a share and smash that bell for alerts. And as always, you can follow us on our social media sites, on Twitter at Sci-Fi More, on Instagram at Sci-Fi and More, and on Facebook at Mike Cosmos Sci-Fi and More. I would like to also say that I am extremely appreciative of all the views our previous video had gotten, the top 10 sci-fi movies of the 1950s. And I would like to thank all of you who commented on our top 10 1950s video. If you have not seen the video yet, I posted the link in the comments below. That video seemed to make a lot of people very happy and brought back a lot of positive, nostalgic feelings for so many that viewed it, including myself. What a great walk down memory lane. There were so many great comments and discussions. I was blown away. I'm still working through all the comments. I want to be sure to answer everyone that took the time to leave a comment. I did notice that there was an overwhelming appreciation of that 1950s genre. So with that, I wanted to share that our next episode will be the top sci-fi movies of the 1950s, part 2. And there will be a part 3 that follows that one. We have heard your requests, and our goal from the beginning was to give you the videos that you, the viewer, wanted. So, with that said, thank you all so very much, and stay tuned, Planeteers, and have a great galactic day.